As always, our show is sponsored by Memoria Press. You can find our curriculum at memoriapress.com.
Welcome to Classical Etc., a show that dives into the philosophy, culture, and heart of classical education. You're in the studio with Shane Saxon.
Welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm sitting with three of my friends, Ian Galloway, Janke, and Mitch Holley. Ian, this is your first time on the show, so I think I need to introduce you to everyone. You're an editor at Memoria Press and just a general, all-around great guy.
Appreciate it.
And then Kyle is a recurring guest who came on a few times, and he is a literature teacher at Highlands Latin School. And then, of course,
he also has a mustache. I don't know if
you see it
adds any sort of value to his opinion at all, but
certainly it does.
It's quite distinguished.
And then finally, we have Mitch, who I'm not sure yet what he brings to the table,
right?
But we keep bringing him back, and we will continue.
Just
to
a good
so
time
for some reason. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about specifically Russian literature because it's something that the three of you guys seem to really like, and I've had conversations with each of you individually about different books written in Russian originally that you like. And to kind of frame this conversation initially, I want to use this metaphor. If you watch a sporting event, like a basketball game, for instance, after the game, usually they'll interview the coach or like the star players to get insight into the game. This podcast will not be that. This is like if after the game, they grabbed some fans off of the bleachers and brought them down and said, what did you think about the game? We're not experts.
Yeah, that's exactly
We're people
right.
who love reading and want to appreciate it together and hopefully share that appreciation with others. But before we get there, let's first stop, and I want to ask each of you guys, what are you reading right now? Mitch, what are you reading right now?
Oh, I'm just reading a few boring philosophy books on Stoic philosophy. So Therapy of Desire. I've read a bit of that book before, but I needed to go back to it.
Is this a modern book about Stoicism, or is this a primary text?
No, this is a modern book about Stoicism. So Nussbaum, I believe is her name, who wrote the book. She's a philosopher, and she's written many great books, but this one in particular is about how the different classical schools of philosophy have integrated theory and practice together. So I don't know if you're bored, but that's it.
Is it a boring book?
No, not at all. It's a very pressing topic.
Stoicism?
Well, just this idea, how does theory affect practice, and how does practice and theory form a way of being in the world that is that has philosophical justification, that is but also competing. There's various ways to be in the world to combine theory and practice.
And you would say Russian literature speaks to how to be in the world?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, we'll come to that. Kyle Janke, what are you reading right now?
Yeah, so I'm working my way again through Hamlet in preparation for a book club that I'm leading here shortly. Being reminded how difficult of a play Hamlet is, how difficult of a character he is. And then I'm also kind of on my off time reading East of Eden because it was suggested to me, and I remain skeptical, but I'm only 100 pages in or so. But it was suggested to me that East of Eden might be a candidate for the great American novel. So I thought I'd better give that a try.
And what's at the top of your great American novel list?
So because it's so short.
You haven't written yours yet?
And so, well, yeah, it's yeah. Ask me in what, I don't know, 20 years. No, so because it's so short, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but I feel like The Great Gatsby might be
Interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't know you were a Gatsby guy.
Great. Oh, I am thoroughly a Gatsby guy.
But have you read any Steinbeck?
Well,
You're
I'm
in the
getting
middle.
there. I'm getting there.
Okay.
Yeah. I've read East of Eden before, but I was in high school and I didn't understand it.
So not Moby Dick.
It's up there. It's in the running.
Okay.
It's a great novel too.
Yeah.
And it's thoroughly American.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
All right. So what would you say are the categories that define the great American novel?
Yeah. I would need, I think, maybe a little more time to think about that. But when I say it's, Moby Dick is thoroughly American, I mean, it's an analysis of American identity and American values and all of those things. I think The Great Gatsby does that exceptionally well also. Just a definition of, in the way that one could look at Homer to see what it means to be Greek.
Yeah.
Like, what novels can we look to see what it means to be American? That might be one of my criteria.
And I imagine there's probably some Russian equivalent that if we were Russian citizens, we would say
I would
this
imagine.
book.
Yeah.
Ian, what are you reading right now?
Yeah. So I'm reading
Besides
through
the Syriac Peshitta.
that, but trying to anyway. So I'm reading through a couple different things I've got lined up in the queue. So we're reading through The Return of the King again, and I love that book. And so super excited to continue reading through that. Also reading through Nikolai Gogol's Dead Souls, which is
so
hilarious.
Gogol, also a Russian.
Also a Russian, and also very funny in a way that some of these other novelists aren't, but very good. And
Have you read any other Gogol before?
No, this is my first experience with Gogol.
And that's because you've read everything else.
No, not necessarily, but he's very unique in many regards. And then working through a Flannery O'Connor.
The reason I was asking Kyle about Moby Dick is I just recently started it and I'm about 16 chapters in. And I went into it. You hear people talk about it like it's the most turgid, like encyclopedic experience. And maybe that just like prepared me for a wonderful experience, but I have found it just hilarious so far. And maybe one of the funniest books I've ever read. Like, it's in the running for sure. And yeah, I'm just like totally captivated by it already, like 16 chapters in. There's a long way to go. I think 134 chapters.
You know, if you find whale violence
not even
funny,
a percentage
is that what
of the
I'm
way
hearing?
through. Yeah.
It's whale violence. Is that what is that the funny part?
If I ever teach Moby Dick again, I might have to call you in as a guest speaker just for 5 minutes to walk in and tell the class this book is funny, and then walk out. And we can continue.
It's killing me. It's honestly, it is. Yeah,
it's fantastic.
It's really funny.
It is a great book.
So yeah, that's what I'm reading right now. So turning our attention to Russian literature, we've all read a little bit. None of us are experts, but we enjoy it and have at least spent the time it takes to read through these books, which are notoriously long and complicated. So I kind of want to just go around the table and get your personal biography with Russian lit and talk about your growth and successes and relationship to this corpus. So starting with you, Mitch.
I guess I started Anna K maybe 3 times before I actually got through it.
Yeah, I think a common experience.
I think I started it too young, frankly.
What are the factors that caused you to give up on it?
So I started too young was the number one thing. The first time I started, it was probably 7th or 8th grade, middle school, and that was a mistake. And then the second time, I was probably in high school and just didn't sufficiently care quite yet about getting past the Russian names. And really, it wasn't until I was more relationally mature, really college, I think, is when I attempted it the third time, where I began to think more in 3D about relationships instead of a sort of 2D, young child who just is still trying to understand that relationships are complicated. They are a friendship can be on many different levels. A marriage is much deeper than a sort of just contractual relationship that you have with somebody, right? So because that's where the book begins to. That's where it plays, right? There's a lot of that's where a lot of the sort of hay is made in that particular book. So it took me being an older reader, a more mature reader, I think, before I realized that there was good quality here. The other books, right? I mean, War and Peace was a big. It was hard to get through, but then there were books that were not hard to get through, like Crime and Punishment, Brothers K, The Idiot. Turgenev is probably by far one of my favorites. Fathers and Sons. I mean, that was just revolutionary for how I relate to my father, and how but again, all of those books I had to approach later in life because reading them earlier, I just wasn't equipped. So just because you can read something doesn't mean you should. I guess is my advice.
So you've read 2 Tolstoy.
Yep.
Anna K and War and Peace.
Yep.
And then 3 Dostoevsky.
Yes.
Which ones did you say? Crime and Punishment.
The
Idiot and Brothers Karamazov.
Yeah, that's right.
And then you've read 1 Turgenev.
That's right. Yes. I read a few of his short stories, although Kyle was just telling me before the conversation, it's been published in a few names, some of those short stories. And I haven't heard the one that you had mentioned, or the
Would you say that you said that the Turgenev story is your favorite out of all of those? Would you say Turgenev is your favorite author among them, or it was just the favorite story, or is there a favorite author?
I would say that, I mean, obviously Anna K is probably one of my favorite actual novels, but I think that when I read Turgenev, that was the book that at the moment impacted me the most. I think I'm more influenced by sitting longer with Anna Karenina. So over the years, I've been influenced maybe more, but I didn't quite have the sort of Copernican revolution that I had when I read, as I did when I read Turgenev.
We'll double back to that and unpack that a little bit. But you've spent a significant, reading that many Russian novels, you spent a significant, again, amount of your time in 19th century Russia.
Right.
What would impel you to do so?
Well, I mean, first of all, Russian culture is fascinating. I'm not sure if you've ever studied or if you've even just read, I think Oxford has a great little short history of Russia, and one of those like short history books. Even if you just flip through that, the history of Russia is fascinating, and the cultural influences, the massive shifts that occurred during the revolutions. So just from a culture standpoint, it's really is rich and has a lot to offer. And there's also something to that sort of early 19th century way of life, right? Where you had an aristocratic class that was a sort of noble aristocracy that saw themselves as needing to take care of or not take care of or neglect those who would be around or working their fields or whatever. There's a lot. I think there's a lot to offer there because Russian culture at the time was so influenced by the French literary tradition and the classical ideas that sort of bubbled up in Central Europe, Western Europe.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because Russian culture and history seems to have like stark evils and then some like interesting good. It's just like there's so much to be found in that history.
There's so much darkness in that history, right? But then there's men all along the way and women who were writing. I mean, trying to argue for the soul of Russia. I mean, isn't that what Brothers K is about? It's about the soul of Russia, and who's going to save the soul of Russia. And there's an interesting answer there about how it will be saved in Brothers K. But
sure. So, Kyle, what is your relationship to this body of Russian literature?
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I could start with just the general awareness that one, just in high school and beyond into college, the awareness that one should have read the Russian authors, without necessarily in college, knowing why that's the case. But
right.
So I guess it started there. I've made similarly many failed attempts at reading. One of them actually was Fathers and Sons, which is I want to know more because that's a novel that I read in college, and I just felt I found it in a used bookstore, and I thought, oh, that title seems meaningful, right? I'm a son, I have a father, so I read it and I just felt like I didn't understand it. It wasn't a dislike. It was just I don't know what this novel is doing. Yeah. It felt foreign. So I've had that. That's part of my experience with that. But then later, I've taught. I taught Anna Karenina, and I actually taught briefly, just sort of a to fill some time at the end of the year, for a couple of years running a Russian short story unit in my senior year literature class, and we did short stories by everyone, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Turgenev. We did a couple by Turgenev. The Singers sticks out in my mind. I think that's the title. Yeah, as just being a beautiful short story, a beautiful piece of literature. We did some Gogol as well. I discovered Gogol's Overcoat, or that's translated differently. I've seen it differently here and there, but the story that Dostoevsky attributes. He said he has some quote about it, all Russian writers come out from under Gogol's overcoat, which is a great line. And then, so you read that, and I think I have some thoughts about what Dostoevsky means by that. But so that's another story that I love. And then, so I taught Anna Karenina for a while.
Yeah, how many years have you taught it?
So I don't teach it currently. I taught it 2 years. Okay. 2 years running. The first year was I was reading it, 2 weeks before the students were reading it, and then scrambling to, handwritten notes that I was taking into class. And and it is a great novel. I confess, maybe to my shame, but maybe it's a position that I want to stand behind. I don't know. But I have stopped halfway through, or I've sort of, slowed and then stopped halfway through the Brothers K twice.
Oh wow!
Not just once, but twice.
That's a real big mistake.
Mhm.
I am.
I would agree with Mitch.
I want to be talked down from my position on that. I want to be proven wrong, but So that's my experience with Dostoevsky, and we can get more into that.
We'll double back to it.
Yeah, I just overall I have a sense of the Russians as that I've read and liked as just being beautiful, beautiful portraits of humanity. The Singers sticks out for that. Gogol's Overcoat is just a breathtaking image of the significance of human life and the meaningfulness, which I think is kind of the best kind of realism. I think we can use the word realism. I don't know, but yeah.
Nice. Ian, what about you?
Yeah, so I began with War and Peace, and similar to some of you guys talking about stopping halfway, got about halfway through and stopped. And really not because I didn't like it, but just because I stopped. And then school, other things took over, and I've never been able to go back. And so that's on the list. I want to get back to that. But then I think my true sort of deep dive into Russian literature was with Dostoevsky, and I spent about a year with him. So I started with Brothers K. And
Sounds like you guys are personal friends.
there are times where I feel that way. I've heard people talk about, whether reading theologians or reading any author, that sometimes it's better, instead of reading widely, just to find your guy, find your person, read them deeply. And
I'm a big proponent of that philosophy.
I think that's a great way to read. And so I did that with Dostoevsky. Now, I haven't read everything that he's done. In fact, I've got a couple of, I think Notes from Underground is one that I've got that I haven't read, and it's pretty short comparatively, and it's one of his early novels. And so it's an interesting, it's interesting. I know a little bit about it, but I need to read it. But the Brothers K introduced me to Russian literature, introduced me to Dostoevsky's writing style, and just sort of I've heard people talk about his writing as polyphonic, this multi-voiced kind of writing, and I think that's spot on.
So what does that mean?
So even just the dialogue is often very unique to each character, and the descriptions of peoples and places is all over the place. He's sort of an extreme writer. We kind of come to understand ourselves through the use of these extreme characters and situations and words that he uses. But he's also, at times very profound and beautiful. The next book I read was Crime and Punishment, which cemented my love for Russian literature. I mean, my heart was racing through the crime,
Yeah.
and just the way he brings all this together. But we can double back to this. It's just a beautiful book. It's dark, it's depressing, but there's hope in the midst of that. And then I read through Demons, The Idiot. Then I spent some time in Anna Karenina, and that was, I think, where I began to understand why people have this discussion about Tolstoy being the greatest novelist. Or, do you like Dostoevsky or Tolstoy better? And reading Anna K, I was like, I can't say I like either one, but because both of them bring profound things to the table. And Anna K, being a married man, was the right time to read it. I didn't read it until about last year, maybe 2 years ago. And just looking at the two marriages, among the many marriages, but the two main ones, and seeing one example of this sort of fallen anti-marriage and one of this beautiful sort of redeemed marriage. It takes time to develop. Was a beautiful thing. And then now reading through Gogol, it's interesting because Dostoevsky says that about him, and I've kind of entered into his work in the final place. I've never read Pushkin or any of the poetry, the Russian poetry, but Gogol is hilarious. I mean, I'm reading through Dead Souls, and it is just one funny paragraph after the other. It's wild.
Yeah.
It's worth reading. Yeah.
Nice. And so with Dostoevsky, you in that year, what were the books that you read in that year?
So I think I began with The Brothers Karamazov, and then was Crime and Punishment, and then was, I think, Demons, or maybe The Idiot. Either one. I think Demons actually I ended on. I think it was The Idiot. And The Idiot's a great story. It's about sort of this beautiful man, beautiful in every way, handsome, but also gifted, and also just somebody that we all would like, and sort of how he's driven, spoiler, to madness by the world around him. And so it's an interesting novel. And I think those four were the big ones that I read. There's maybe one that I'm missing.
That would take you a good year.
Yes, it took a while.
So would you weigh into the Dostoevsky versus Tolstoy debate?
Listen, I don't have enough ammo for that. I like Dostoevsky, I think, more because of my first experience. He was sort of the one that grabbed me, and I think there's something to that. You know, you kind of have those authors like The Lord of the Rings. It's the first fantasy that I read, and it turned me into a lover of fantasy.
Sure.
So I think with Dostoevsky, and now I like Russian literature, even though it's multifaceted, even though not everybody's Dostoevsky by any means, but I love it because I got in with him.
Yeah.
It's almost like the yin and yang, right,
Yeah.
of Russian literature. You have the light and the dark right
Yeah.
next to each other. You have, Anna Karenina, which is more, it has a different color to it,
Yeah.
a different texture, a different
Yeah.
lens.
Yeah.
Whereas, Crime and Punishment is, that can be depressing.
Yeah. Well, per usual, I'm the least well read among the four of us, and I've read Crime and Punishment and Anna K. I read that a few weeks ago. I finally finished it, and what I thought was interesting in each of your guys' answers is that all four of us started and stopped with one of them. For me, it was Anna K. I've started and stopped it 3 times until I finally finished it. And same thing that you were saying, Ian. It's not that I didn't like it. I just stopped reading.
Yeah.
And then finally come back to it. But in those two experiences, they have both been unique reading experiences, unlike anything else that I've read. And the only thing I think I would add that you guys haven't mentioned is that I think there has to be a sense in which the reasons that Tolstoy and Dostoevsky seem to resonate with people even today, 150-ish years later in a different country, is they're very much theologians. Maybe not orthodox, maybe not, perfect in every way or aligned with the standard, Protestant or Catholic, theological systems in America. But in both of those novels specifically, there are very Christocentric themes that come through and that I think resonate with people.
So, yes, I might, and this gets back to the Tolstoy Dostoevsky debate. I might say that or go along with that with Dostoevsky. One of my questions was going to be, I was trying to think of a way to word it. I don't know if this is quite the way to word it, but I mean, is the Brothers K whole as a work of art, as a text, as a novel?
Let's have this discussion now.
I can feel the ragged edge and the pull of that in Dostoevsky. The desperation. What I love about Tolstoy is the completeness and the he knows where he's going. He's taking his time. Now, I taught Anna Karenina, which is the most powerful motivation to get through a novel, I think, because you have to walk into a room and sound intelligent
Stand
about
up
it.
in front of people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have that. I mean, I can't claim to that may be coloring my opinion. But it just felt, I got a sense of him. I would say Tolstoy's a novelist first. He's a writer first, and that theology is there. The belief is there, but he's an artist making art and doing it really well, and a certain kind of art. Dostoevsky, I feel, especially Brothers K. Now there might be I don't know. I'll just throw it out there, and you guys can
I
argue me down.
I agree with exactly 50% of what you just said. Okay, obviously,
You've only read half the book. He agrees with.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, obviously, Tolstoy is a true artist. I mean, he is painting a incredible picture of what a marriage should be and shouldn't be. And that ultimately, I mean, he's the canvas there, has light and dark. And as a result, you see things very clearly. So yes, of course, totally agree. Stamp of approval. Okay. Everything else you said was complete trash. So Brothers K, I mean, it's incredibly, not only does it hold up as a novel, so there's a unity to it. It's telling one story, which even the way it ends pretty abruptly, and he does that on purpose. But it also is deeply Christian because it is arguing that the central thing that is going to save Russia is Christ. The central thing that will save Russia is Christ. So think about the Grand Inquisitor in the very middle section of the Brothers K. The Grand Inquisitor is asking questions of who? Jesus. And the Grand Inquisitor, and basically the Grand Inquisitor is supposed to represent the church, but yet he's trying to manipulate Jesus into being a basically just a power play, right? We're trying to. The Grand Inquisitor is trying to manipulate Christianity into a tool to oppress the masses, right? And so that the ultimate question, taking a step back, before that, the main question of the novel is, if you could create a perfect society where everyone was flourishing, right? Everyone was truly happy, but yet you had to kill an innocent child to get that, would you do it? And the Grand Inquisitor says, yes, I would. I would kill Jesus. Jesus would be, I would take Jesus out of the center of religion. And then at the very end, you have this kind of abrupt ending. And then the question is posed, right? How would you achieve that? Would you be willing if one innocent were to die? And that's the question throughout the entire novel. And then at the very end, you have this minor character who dies. And the main character stands up in front of all these little children and says, it is the memory of this one man, this one child who died selflessly in love that will cause all of us to be fundamentally different. And so the Grand Inquisitor, who is the heart of Russia, was not answering the question correctly. He was killing Jesus in order to answer the question, but this child who embodied Jesus ultimately becomes the one who saves them all. And the paradox is that one innocent died so that the rest of them could live a transformed life. And so that original question, would you kill an innocent so that you can create a world where everyone would live with flourishing, in a way that is flourishing, is ultimately answered yes and amen, both by the life of the little boy, but also that is an echo of the life of Jesus. And that's the question that Russia has to answer.
Yeah, jump in here. Do you agree with Mitch?
Oh, I agree, because when you read the Brothers K the first time, you think, what's going on?
The Grand Inquisitor and the end of the book are separated by 600 pages.
That's exactly right. And a murder mystery. And so you think, the murder is the whole thing. But that ending, I think the ending forces you to reckon with the beginning of the book, with that question. And when I have the benefit of being in a book club discussion with Mitchell about this, so I do agree, because I've listened to it before, and I think, yes, that's the right analysis of the Brothers K.
Yeah, it was a good time. You should have been there, Kyle.
Yeah,
you would have read the second half.
So. You would have been forced through it. Yeah.
So a lot of people stop at the Grand Inquisitor because it doesn't make any sense. They're like, why? And you really don't know why it makes sense until the end of the book.
The end. Yeah.
Does that address your objection?
I don't know. I'm thinking about it because I'm thinking of this is. I don't want to say this to someone who has just started Moby Dick, but balance when it comes to art. This is my one critique of Melville that I would have is that he's a little bit imbalanced. That there's so much passion and love of what he loves, I mean, this is why, it sort of takes people out. Now, I think I would argue for getting through it. I'm sure you would argue for, you have argued, for getting through Brothers K. But I think that question of balance still remains for me for Dostoevsky as well. It's just, there's, like you said, 600 pages separating. Yeah. What integrates all of that and ties that all together?
I think the central organizing question is that question proposed at the beginning, and where they're, the brothers talking.
And I think it takes working through the three brothers to get to that, because you got Ivan, you got Dmitri, you got Alyosha, and they are all different. And you have to look at the answer that Ivan provides, and it's not satisfying. You got to look at the answer that Dmitri provides, and it's not satisfying. And at the end, Alyosha, spoiler, is the one that provides the right answer, even though he may not have logically gotten there, even though his arguments when he's discussing with Ivan or Dmitri are always that compelling. It's just the beauty of his life and the beauty of the lives of the children and of the life of the innocent, particularly, that wins you in the end.
So let's move from this kind of specific discussion of Brothers K and zoom out a little bit to a more general question. And that is, there have been many situations where you guys each have decided, what I'm going to do for the next hour or 2 hours is open up this translation of a Russian book and sit here. Yeah. What are the forces that have caused you to do that? What are you guys looking for in this quest when you pick up those books? Why would someone else do the same and not pick up Steinbeck or any other, like, or Victor Hugo or some other language, something like that?
Yeah. I think realism is done best. Now I'm using that word. I don't know if that's the proper word to use, but as distinct from a great work of literature being an epic poem with gods and goddesses involved, or fantasy fairy tale with magic involved, elves and whatnot. The Russians aren't doing any of that. They're not. Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, the big names are not writing poetry. They're writing novels. And I think there's something about the novel that is conducive to realism, there's a match there. And I think what realism does best, or let me rephrase, I think what I want from realism, I think realism at its best is perceiving the worth of a human being. That looking at humanity as it truly is, and giving it profound image of our humanness, and affirming it and finding worth and beauty in it. This is Gogol's The Overcoat. This is kind of that would be the text that I would point to say that, like, that book, because it involves. I mean, the story it's not a story at all. He's a clerk whose coat is, ragged and torn, and he can't afford a new one. And it's the story of how he saves up enough money to finally afford a new one, and then his trials in trying to get this new coat made, and then what ends up happening with his new coat. That's the content of the story. There's almost nothing there. It's not the anger of Achilles. It's just this coat. Sure. But in that is such a rich view of human life is meaningful. Even the acquiring and the losing of a beautiful coat can matter deeply because human life matters deeply. And that's I think what I look for, and that's what makes it valuable, compelling, necessary to read.
Yeah, I think anyone. I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think what's great.
So Mitch, you're just going to answer the question, even though before this episode, when I said I was going to ask this question, you said, you looked in my eyeballs and you said, that's a stupid question.
Yeah, that's true. Well, on one part of me just thinks, well, the question ultimately reduces to why read a book? Sure. Because, but to Kyle's point, there is a sense in which the Russian novelists in particular, wade into the infinite amount of gray that exists in how humans relate to the world. And that's why I think I was a failed reader of Russian literature until I was older, until I, had your first argument with your wife, or realized,
or your
50th, and realize that this is someone I love, but also they're really frustrating to me, and and realizing that I caused some of that, and so you have to, in order to appreciate the realness of what they're bringing to you, which is always relationships that are in repair or in disrepair. I have to first sort of have enough life experience to recognize how truly real this is. Growing up, you just have a little bit of an idealized, most kids, not every kid, but a lot of kids have just an idealized notion about what a friendship is, what a husband and wife relationship should look like. And so reading something like this it's almost too real for them, that it's like it hurts to touch, right? Whenever, but then whenever you get into a little bit more life experience, this helps me this gives me the vocabulary and the lens to be able to interpret my own human experiences, and maybe that's the realism that you're getting at.
Yeah, I might even take that just a step further and say I think maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but a lot of young people have a fantasy of what being an adult is, and of doing great things and doing grand things, and then you grow up, and
you do none of those things.
Yeah, right. I almost at sometimes I want to introduce to the conversation too that just Russian snow.
Sure.
I've never been to Russia.
Hardship.
But I get the impression it's cold, right? But as opposed to the Mediterranean, where I think you see this in art too, where Mediterranean, there's
nature wasn't a character because it's not killing you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there's an openness and there's a freedom of movement, you might say, in Mediterranean art, Mediterranean literature. Whereas Russia I grew up in Wisconsin, so I think I can speak to this a little bit.
3 of the 4 of us grew up in Wisconsin. So.
South Carolina, so no.
Well, okay, yeah. Yeah, but that just the significance of the weather, the obstacle of the weather, getting in the way of that childhood fantasy idea of what it means to be an adult and do big things. The Russians speak to that, and then the Russians hand you the meaningfulness of it.
Yeah. It's a great point. I think, Mitch, on your point, a good example of this would be there's this film, I haven't seen it, and maybe Kyle, you have, and you can tell me the title of it, but it's a Woody Allen movie, and I know the plot of it. And that is the guy ends up killing someone. And the whole kind of point of the movie is that he kills someone and then nothing happens. Yeah. Like he expects it to be just this big event where he killed someone, but like nothing happens. And the point that Woody Allen is trying to make is this very like sarcastic, nihilistic, kind of just pessimistic, nothing matters. It's just people kill people and life goes on. Where that could not be any more different than Crime and Punishment, where Raskolnikov, when he kills someone, he thinks he can get away with it, and yet it destroys him.
It's a psychological terror to him.
Yeah, and he needs redemption. He needs to walk the cross of suffering and to lay that sin down. And so it's a realism, but it's not a realism that doesn't have meaning infused in it. It's not a surrealism.
Yeah,
Right.
That's a really interesting connection. So the movie is Crime and Punishment, I think that you're referencing. The last shot
Woody
of
Allen movies
Yes.
is called Crime and Punishment?
Yes.
That's hilarious.
So, I'm sorry. No, crimes, but still, crimes and misdemeanors.
Crimes and misdemeanors.
Yeah. Crimes and misdemeanors.
That's good.
But
that is very
Yeah.
close.
Yeah. I mean, that's not on. That's on purpose.
Yeah, it's gotta
That has
be,
to
yeah.
be. I mean,
Yeah.
The last shot of the movie, though, is one of the side characters who, throughout the course of the movie, is going blind. And there are many conversations in the movie about the tragedy of that and the loss of that. It's him blind, now fully blind at the end of the movie, dancing with his daughter at her wedding, and he's happy. And there's a feeling that the movie is
Maybe not
looking
so
at.
nihilistic.
Yeah, well, he's a man of faith, right? As opposed to all the nihilistic characters in the film. And I think there's a tone there of the nihilism looking at the man of faith with envy, with a sense of jealousy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
But he doesn't have it.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, but a definite contrast to Crime and Punishment, where he looks at his mom and he's holding the secret that he killed someone, and it dawns on him, I'll never be able to relate to anyone ever again because they'll never know what I did, and if I told them, it would ruin everything. I mean, just the weight of, I mean, in my own marriage, if I had done something right that I'm too ashamed to tell my wife. I mean, the severity of what that does, not just to me, but now to my relations. And I will never, because of certain sins that might be in my life, it might be impossible for me to relate more fully, right? Unless that is dealt with, and that's psychological torture.
So we're talking about the curse or the discipline and the punishment of wrongdoing being a blessing that actually restores life,
Right?
Yeah.
And the freedom to be nihilistic and to do whatever you want, the quote unquote freedom, actually being the curse.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Ian, coming back to the original question, what kept you coming back to the well?
Well, I think there's certainly that prestige of reading these novels because you hear all your life,
These are the ones.
These are the ones to read.
Yeah.
And so there's certainly a draw to do that. And I absolutely tried to pick up War and Peace for that very reason. But I think it was learning that the Russian novelists have a unique insight into the human experience. And we've already talked this. I'm not going to necessarily bring too much more to that part of the conversation, but they do. They talk about you experience the full range of human emotion in each of the works, Crime and Punishment. You do so in the Brothers Karamazov. You do so in Anna Karenina because you've got a character in Anna Karenina who you empathize with and sympathize with, even though she's wrong and what she's done is wrong. She's not wholly wrong. You understand why she does these things. And Tolstoy writes her in such a way that you grow to sorrow at her ending.
Yeah.
And I think that's a powerful thing that they bring to the table.
Yeah. Coming back around to Turgenev, Mitch, you had a religious experience with the book Fathers and Sons. Kyle, however, said it was a snooze fest.
I also did not get through it, but I was listening to it, and that may have been the problem.
I'm oppressed on all sides.
You are.
In this conversation.
Yeah, so I would like you to speak for yourself.
I mean, at the end of the day, when you first looked at the book, Kyle, you thought to yourself intuitively, I'm a son, I have a father, so this is, and ultimately that's what it's all about. It's about a father and a son, and what I didn't quite, or what you ultimately find out is what happens whenever you come to see the world completely different than your father. Okay. Every son grows up, and at first you look at your father as he is Superman. He's here. He's the hero of every tale. He opens up the cookie jar when mom can't do it. He takes me to the sporting events. He dies for me on a regular basis, right? So he is a superhero. But what happens when you grow up? You come to find out that he's had some false opinions. He's had some things that maybe you disagree with. How could that destroy your relationship? Or how could there be another answer to that question? How could it not destroy your relationship when you come to see the world differently? So in the story, the son goes off to St. Petersburg. He leaves the country. He goes to the city, and he receives the latest German philosophy, nihilism. His father, on the other hand, received an education, but it was years and years earlier when French Romanticism was the primary governing philosophy in the academy at the time. So you've got a nihilist son, a romantic father. The romantic father, there's meaning in everything. The son, there's meaning in nothing, right? On top of these two characters, you have their foils. The son brings home a friend who has no balance whatsoever. He's the perfect nihilist. There's meaning in nothing at all. The father, his brother, is in the story in the well. He's the perfect romantic. He's the guy who all he cares about is aesthetic tastes. Okay, so these two players on the end, the friend of the son and the uncle, they hate each other, right? Because that's the natural. There's meaning in everything, everywhere, and there's meaning nowhere. Right? So they can't relate on any level whatsoever. And in the middle of these two philosophies is this one relationship between a father and a son, where the father and the son have to come to grips with the way that they're viewing the world could destroy their relationship. It could destroy them. And it destroyed the foil, right? But but they're not real characters. They're just supposed to be a pure light and a pure dark, right? The real characters are the father and the son. And what I glean from this is that, like I said, every kid gets to a point where they see that their dad, they disagree with their dad, and they could either say, therefore we have no relationship, or they could learn to see the value and appreciate their father for who he is and for his place in time, recognizing what he's accomplished, maybe different than what you want to accomplish, but wanting to be the best of what he was. And that hit me at a time where, not that I was like hating my dad or anything, but although we all read literature and philosophy as a cheap form of therapy. Am I right? Literature in philosophy are
Sometimes
it's just
not so cheap. Sometimes it's thousands of pages.
Yeah, it's that. So on one hand, yes, therapy, but on the other hand, just to seeing my dad in a fresh light, right? Because that's what the character in the novel has to do. He has to see his dad in a fresh light.
Yeah.
That's my pitch.
So what I take away from this is that Ian and Kyle haven't gotten to that part of therapy yet.
That's right. Yeah, we're on the road.
They have a little farther to go.
I guess I agree with my dad on everything.
Yeah, that's right. He's a smart man.
No, that's good. And I think it speaks to just the way that these novels, as you guys have said over and over again, are so acute in their description of the human condition. And that's kind of what keeps us coming back to them. Here's a question, though, that I think we could end on. The reason that this topic is appropriate for this table, this show, is because the project of classical education, at least in part, is to prepare people for a life where they fill it with good, rich things. That is, you cannot access these books without some level of preparation. And hopefully our classical educations put students in a position where they can decide, I'm going to spend a year with Dostoevsky, and it'll be a rich one. What are your guys' tips, tricks, words of advice for an adult who wants to engage with these books? Where should they start? What should they do? How would you recommend that they engage? And I'll just start it by saying, to Kyle's chagrin, use audiobooks.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
I've read Anna Kay on audio and thoroughly enjoyed it. Read by Maggie Gyllenhaal, the actress. And she read it very well. And if I know I'm going to be in the car driving to work for 25 minutes there and back, doesn't matter how long the book is, I'm going to get through it eventually. And then when I really start liking the book, my walks with my dog just start getting longer and longer and longer. So I'm like, I just want to get a couple more chapters in. So that would be a piece of advice I would recommend, especially for long books. I think that's a good way to overcome the obstacle of just sitting still.
Perhaps there's some short ones that you guys would recommend that would be good. Because I haven't read too many of the short ones, but I know you.
I liked when I began with Dostoevsky. I had forgotten that I read. There's a collection. It's translated by Richard Bevere, and I think her name is Larissa Molikansky. Yeah, and it's the Double and the Double and the Gambler, and it's two of his shorter novels put together. And it's difficult to read. Just like any of these, there are obstacles to reading it. You have to deal with the Russian names. I mean, let's just be real. Like those are difficult for English.
How do you do that? Like,
if you have one of these good editions, they often have at the very beginning just a short guide to the Russian names, and they'll tell you, by the way, Mitya is a diminutive of Dmitri, and so you got to memorize that. You got to do some vocabulary cards. But over time,
do you actually have vocabulary cards?
I've never done
that point.
I've never done vocabulary.
That's an Ian approach for sure.
I have never done vocabulary flashcards, but you do. You have the resource to come back to it if you need to.
You can do that.
Yeah.
My pushback is that just find a pronunciation that makes sense to you for every Russian name.
That's the way Mitchell speaks the English language.
Right. So, whatever pronunciation works for you. That's how I approach the English language. That's how I approach names that I don't recognize. It works for me.
That's true.
It's my own personal language, and I understand what I mean.
That's fine
when I say that sound.
Well, I can second you on that. If you just give, if in your own head, if you give a sound. Now, if you're doing an audiobook, you got the names
you got it
pronounced for you.
It's great.
But if you get a certain sound in your head that goes with that name, that makes it 10 times more recognizable.
Dan.
Well, okay, yeah, something.
Chad.
Yeah, whatever that is. It makes it that much
So
more
you're saying that you see
recognizable.
Raskolnikov on the page and you think Chad?
Yeah, that was his name for me, Chad. It's spelled a little differently. I guess I would, we're friends, but
Yeah.
I'm going to push against you one more time.
You're fine.
I don't
can
think we
handle
should
it.
start with Dostoevsky.
Yeah, see, that's the way Mitchell.
What's your personal pronunciation of Dostoevsky?
I can't. You asked me to
Dolph?
pronounce Dolph.
So,
Just
who would you
because-
start with?
I would start with Anna Kay.
Yeah, I think Tolstoy is easier to read. I think he's more linear.
Yeah.
I think you certainly have.
And not Brothers K either.
No, yeah. And I think Crime and Punishment, if you're going to do Dostoevsky,
That's a
maybe
good
one of
point.
the small ones.
Yeah.
Or Crime and Punishment.
Yeah,
because
that's
that's
a good
probably
point.
his most linear novel in the sense that you're reading a plot that goes from beginning to end.
And it's gripping.
And it's
Yeah.
gripping.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think Tolstoy is better to approach. Maybe not War and Peace.
No,
Your first
that
one?
should be one of the last books. you
Yeah.
read.
I would say Anna Karenina has really good chapter lengths. Like they're
Yes.
not long,
Yeah.
and that's super helpful. And it is just like clear prose.
Yeah, and pacing. It moves. It changes fast enough to something else that you can then connect with what came before.
Sure.
It doesn't leave you for too long with one scene or one idea or one. Yeah. Another one I suggest by Tolstoy is Master and Man, which is almost novel length. It's a novella. It's a long short story, but very, very good and very, very representative. I think of what Tolstoy is all about. It's the relationship between a servant and his master. They get into trouble in the snow. So yeah, and I mean, the short stories, they're great. So I know it as Turgenev's Sportsman's Notebook, or sometimes I think the Huntsman's.
Yeah, I always thought it was
Notebook or
the
the-
Huntsman.
the
The
Hun- yeah,
Huntsman.
yeah. It's translated differently, but that series of short stories, many of them, my take on them is they exist for the joy of storytelling and the joy of writing and just the beauty of human interactions. That's a good place to start as well. And then the
Those
overcoat,
short stories are very
of course.
approachable. Yeah, those would be really good.
Yeah.
So Ian, you were saying use the pronunciation guide at the beginning of the novel. Did you have any other?
Really more the character list.
Character
I mean,
list,
That
yeah.
will help you. And then it will give you some insight into, when you run across a diminutive or a nickname as you're reading.
Yeah.
Because these novels are filled with nicknames and multiple names. So that will be helpful. I think find a good translation, but don't agonize over that. I personally like the Pavir and Polakowski translations of most of these. I mean, they've done Tolstoy, they've done Dostoevsky.
I've definitely printed out a list of all the names before, and had that next to me.
It's doable.
Any other tips, tricks, advice as you approach Russian literature from you two?
I don't know how much advice this is, just something to appreciate, a reason to read the Russians. I think a person can be moved and compelled by persuasive thoughts, persuasive argument, or I think a person can be moved and compelled by the reality of the meaningfulness of life. And I think reading the Russians, looking for that, looking for this civilization lost in a snowdrift, right? But that has this warm, coal, smoldering away on the inside of their art and their literature, at least for that time in history. I think that's valuable to a person, and I think it's worth spending the time through the pages, right? To get to that and get a sense of that human warmth and a sense of ourselves in that way.
It makes me think a little bit of your point you were making earlier that in Russia, the weather is such a pernicious character, and it is a character. I think you can contrast that with American literature, where also in American literature, the environment, nature is a massive character because people came here and there was so much of it.
Yes.
But here, that character is sometimes hopeful and sometimes like a place you go to escape the confines of civilization and reality. You get a little bit of that in Anna Kay, but I think it is interesting that just the condition of being in a place where it is so cold that your appendages might fall off is going to shape how you view the world and give you a transport you to another world that's vivid and interesting.
You might even say that. I mean, that might even be uniquely Russian, perhaps. I mean, everyone's kind of looking for, what is Russianness? What does that mean? It's hard to be sort of a romantic poet wandering off in solitude, to contemplate, the babbling brook. It's hard to do that in the middle of winter in Russia. You are stuck with your fellow man. You're stuck with fellow human beings. I think you get a sense of that in Russian literature, and not just stuck, but working through that and flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to any of the Russian novels. Wife, I believe, did start an audiobook for Janke, and I think that was just a helpful. And I listened to parts of it when she was doing that, and it was well done, and it was easy to follow, and at times when you're first getting started, if you just have an on ramp. That's the key. Having an on ramp, and if you're a mom at home and you have limited time and you're folding laundry, then it'd be great to get a few chapters in, and that would be a great way to fit it in.
Yeah,
fit some therapy in.
I think don't expect to get it all the first time. I mean, this is something that you read again and again, and that's all the great books.
Read it with other people. When we read Brothers K together, I mean, and had that book discussion, that was over a nice meal. That was very enjoyable. I gleaned a lot more from the reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've enjoyed talking with you guys about these books. It's been a lot of fun, and I appreciate you guys coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Classical Etc. If you'd like to show your support for the show, then you can leave a like below. If you'd like to add your voice to the conversation, then you can comment. And if you want to follow along with us on this journey, then please subscribe. Thanks, and I'll see you later.